Yeah, it's just like regular Tim's Enthusiast Garage, but it's just me in my garage talking. Yeah, I hope someone wants to watch.
Welcome to another episode of Garage Talk here in Tim's Enthusiast Garage. On today's episode, I thought I'd talk you through how I buy a car. Many of you have seen that over the past 3 years since I've been doing this, 2.5, 3 years since I've been doing this channel, I've bought and sold several cars. Some of the cars have stayed in the garage, some of the cars were permanent, and if you watch the episode on the depreciation curve, you'll know kind of what my thinking is there. But I wanted to sort of walk you through my recent acquisition, and I guess this is the reveal party for what the most recent car is that's come to the garage. And as I talk this through, I think it'll be maybe interesting to some of you. It may be totally different than the way a lot of you buy and sell cars, and I think that's totally fine. I think whatever works for you, by all means, do that. For me, when it's time to buy another car, another investment vehicle, it's important that that vehicle be a car that I've always wanted to own, that I've always wanted to interact with. And for me, the most recent acquisition is this Bentley. I bought a Bentley. Many of you have watched the episode on the Bentley Arnage versus the Continental GT. And in that, I was sort of conflicted. I mean, which is the better car? I think that ultimately, watch that episode, see what my thoughts are. But I think ultimately for me, what swayed me and what I could not get away from is the amount of time that is spent creating a Bentley Arnage, or in the more modern sense, a Bentley Mulsanne. They spend so much time making these cars that they're far more bespoke than the similar Continental GT and Flying Spur. In fact, the production numbers are about 10%. I mean, it varies year to year. But in terms of how many Mulsannes or Arnages they make annually, it's about 10% or a little bit more. Again, it depends every year. But say 6,000 versus 600. And also the amount of time, you're talking about 450 to 650 hours to make an Arnage. And that overwhelmed me. And sort of the opportunity to have that sort of car long term, I decided that it was time to buy a long-term ownership car. If you watch my episode on the depreciation curve, I'll say something interesting here. I still don't, even when I've decided on a car, I weigh the value of that car very heavily. Because at the end of the day, vehicles are assets. And while it is great to own the best version of a specific car, for example, my Coupe Quattro is probably the best version of that car that still exists that I'm aware of. And that's really why I bought it. Same thing with my Scirocco. It's probably the best version that's still around that I could find or that I could afford. With the Arnage and with my car buying habits in general, I thought I'd share with you, with this specific purchase, kind of what my thinking was. So when I decided I was going to buy another car, one of the factors was, will it be interesting for the YouTube channel? This was a tough one because honestly, I've already covered the Arnage, and my thoughts on the Arnage have already been covered somewhat on the channel. Now I'm going to get into them far further, and the ownership proposition is obviously different, owning a car for 2 or 3 years versus owning a car for a very short period of time or reviewing it simply for the YouTube channel. So I do think that, like the Esprit, I've owned Esprits for 20 years now, I do think I'll have a deeper understanding and be able to share a little more insight for those of you who really want to add an Arnage to your collection. So that's one thing. The other thing is, when I'm looking for a car, there's sort of cars with different disciplines. I have so many different cars that I can drive on a daily basis, including usually a daily driver, including usually a beater, and including usually a couple cars that my wife and I can drive and aren't project cars or anything like that. And then there's the collectible cars. So the collectible cars, like the 928 or like the Maserati or the 4C or the R32 Skyline, those get taken out on rare occasions. I have different, sort of specific purposes. The 4C I really enjoy bombing corners with and that sort of thing. The Esprits, I like a nice cruise, I like corners, I like a drive with friends. And so every car sort of has its thing. And as I started thinking about what what cars I wanted, there are a few holes. So I'd like to have another convertible. So I was looking at, again, a car that maybe is at the bottom of its depreciation curve or is about to go up, or this might be my last chance to own one of those cars if I don't buy it. And that one of those cars is the 944 S2. I think the 944 S2 is very underrated. The 3-liter inline 4 is, I mean, think about that. 3-liter 4-cylinder engine, well over 200 horsepower, similar performance to the turbo of the era. Now, granted, you could modify the turbo and make it much, much faster. So we're not exactly comparing apples to oranges, but the 944 S2 to me is a captivating and compelling car, and they're really starting to climb in value. A few years ago, you could regularly find 944 S2s for not very much money, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. Now, $15,000 to $20,000, $25,000, even $30,000 for a great one is kind of where they're at. And so, I'm looking for a car that's a good car, but I'm also looking for a car that's a great value. And so that's really what I was looking for with this purchase. I considered several other cars. I considered a variety of AMG cars. I think AMG cars, particularly sort of the first 2 generations of AMG cars, are on the rise. It's really hard to find good ones. And so those cars entered the mix as well. Audi R8s briefly entered the mix. Audi R8s, I think, still have some value to lose, and so I'm not there yet. And I think that those are used so sparingly by most owners that my opportunity to own one sort of from a new perspective is still pretty possible. When I was looking for a car, I was looking for a lot of different cars. And the cars that I was looking for were as diverse as even Porsche Boxsters and Boxster S's. I'm shocked that those have kind of loitered at the bottom. I guess I shouldn't be, because 914s and 944s, they've all been the lesser Porsche. But the Boxster, in so many ways, and I shouldn't say this because I don't even currently own one, but in a lot of ways it's sweeter than the 911. That mid-engine chassis is just absolutely fantastic, and they get a lot of flack, and I think it's a real shame because they're fantastic cars to drive. The Boxster S is absolutely captivating, and there's multiple generations, and I think it's one of those situations where those cars are the time is right. Which brings me to the car that I ultimately bought, the Bentley Arnage. The Bentley Arnage is a car I've always loved, and driving it home the night that I bought it was pretty special. There's just something different about when you buy a car and the goal is probably to keep the car potentially forever and give it to your kids. There's just a different feel to that. I don't even really know how to explain it other than it's a special moment. And I found myself driving home in that car and sort of really for the first time noticing specific elements of the car that I had missed before. Because when you own a car briefly, or when you own a car with the purposes of selling it, or when you just drive a car to sort of review it for the YouTube channel, there's a different thing. Sort of like with a press car, when I get a press car to review for a magazine, it's a different vibe. There's also a more abusive vibe, because a lot of times if it's a performance car, you're trying to get the best performance out of the car, sometimes with no mechanical sympathy. That's why when I see these tests where they give these numbers, the reality is, a Viper or a Corvette or whatever car may have a specific performance metric, but a lot of times you're not going to drive your car with that same reckless abandon. So there I am in my new Arnage, and I need to talk about this car, what my process was with buying this car. And the process was sort of weighing out the best value across numerous cars, and sort of the best, and then amongst Arnages, when I landed on Arnages, it was really, where's the best buy? And for me, the best buy was not the most physically great car I could find. This car has some dents and dings, it has some things that need fixed, but mechanically it was fantastic. It was, ironically, the first owner of the car was the United States government. I found that hilarious on so many different levels. And then it was owned by a senator for a few years. Also hilarious on several levels, because I know if I ever ran for Congress or for the Senate or any office, you sort of get impugned. The car hobby, for whatever reason, is considered not sort of as a investment strategy, but is considered like a luxury and therefore something that's negative. But the car had fantastic ownership history. The Carfax was very detailed, and it showed no damage on the car. Additionally, it was a car that the seller had for a while and was looking to, the price had sort of crept down, and there's not a lot of buyers for Arnages. I mean, the Arnage is one of those cars that I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I'd like to have an Arnage, but I don't know that I'd like to run an Arnage or pay for running an Arnage. All of the paperwork was sent over, recent documentation, many services that I was concerned about had been done in the last 3 or 4 years. The car had a completely stamped book from day one through the first I think it goes to the first 10 years of ownership, and after that even it was pretty good ownership history. The car was washed regularly. That was noticed on the Carfax. And so there was a car here that was really in great shape but needed some things. So needed a few odds and ends. And I was more than willing to do that. And the price that I ended up getting the car was such that it sort of could not be passed on. Those have started creeping up. And you've got to think, with Arnages, Arnage Red Labels and Arnage T's and R's, they're very few. On average per year, they're making 500, maybe 800 cars for total world consumption. I believe the year that mine is, there's 600 and so cars. Again, not all of them came to the United States. So in the United States, this is a very, very rare car. Some people have never seen this car. And I was very excited to get the car. Now, I'd also say, I'll take a little aside here and say that no matter what car you buy, due diligence is important. Had I done a PPI on this car, which I did not because I trusted the seller, I trusted the Carfax, and the price was sort of, the car could have come with no electronics working, and I probably still would have taken it. But it did have some things that weren't disclosed that at least I would have disclosed if I were selling the car. And so what I'd say is either be comfortable that the price is so low that you're comfortable with that risk, or definitely do a PPI. It's ironic. I do PPIs for people. Tim's Enthusiast Garage gets called regularly to do PPIs. Truly looking at a car before you buy it is pretty important. I think being comfortable with the car before it ships is important. Nothing replaces going and picking up a car in person. Many years ago, I bought a 944 Turbo that was totally not as described, but the price was right. So I still ended up with the car. I did negotiate a lower price while I was there. But I do recommend that when you buy a car, when you sort of are in the process of looking for a car, you make a list and actually physically write down what your core desires are, what you really want to get out of the car, and sort of where the walk point is, where the high point is, and all those sorts of things are known before you make the decision to buy the car or to even really shop for the car. In closing, when you're looking for a new collector car, I think that you need to be your own best guide. I'm not suggesting that the Bentley Arnage is necessarily the best car for everybody, but I do think that you need to, sort of like I did, where if you talk to another dealer and you say, well, what are you looking for? And you list 12 cars, a Boxster S, a AMG car, an Arnage, they think these things have nothing in common. And really, they don't have anything in common. But what all of these cars do have in common is that I've always loved them and they're a great deal. And so I do recommend that the next time you buy a car, that the value is right. Because I on a regular basis, I talk to people that have had to sell that car that they thought they would never sell. And it's a real happy day when the car that you thought you'd never sell, you bought to own forever, is now worth 3 times what you paid for it. And so that's really what I wanted to discuss today on Garage Talk. Stay tuned for my Bentley Arnage video. That's coming up this season. The car isn't perfect, so I'll be doing a variety of services on the car, as well as sort of just pointing out to you in not an overall review video, but in sort of specific videos, sort of what the ownership experience is like. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and tell a friend. And thanks so much. This has been Garage Talk.